Welcome everyone. You're watching the monthly webinar of Shasthra Snehi. My name is Anand Narayanan and I'm part of the Shasthra Snehi team. Before I introduce today's distinguished speaker, allow me to say a few words about Shasthra Snehi. Shasthra Snehi is a not-for-profit open access magazine featuring a wide range of news articles and essays covering exciting new ideas from the world of science. This free online magazine is an initiative of a group of students, undergraduate students, school students, research scholars, and teachers from universities with a shared interest for science, science education, and the promotion of scientific literacy. I request all of you who are watching this webinar to check out sometime later the magazine's website at https://shastrasnehi.com. Let me now move on to today's webinar. It's our honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Seth Shostak, who is going to be our webinar speaker today. Seth is a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute in the US. For those of you who do not know, SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The SETI Institute is a not-for-profit organization with the primary mission to explore, understand, and explain the origin, nature, and prevalence of life in the universe. Seth earned his bachelor's degree in physics from the Princeton University in the US, and he got his PhD in astrophysics from the California Institute of Technology many decades ago. Since 2001, he has been with the SETI Institute. In addition to research in radio astronomy, Seth is also passionate and deeply committed to getting the public, especially young people, excited about astrobiology and science in general, which is one of the main reasons why we are also very delighted and excited to have him as our speaker today. Seth has been featured in several documentary films and feature films on science and has been interviewed for television a number of times. He has written several books on the topic of SETI. Confessions of an Alien Hunter, a scientist's search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is his most recent book from 2009. So today we have over 500 people who have tuned into this webinar, and probably many more are watching us live on YouTube stream. After Seth's presentation, which will be for about 45 to 50 minutes, he will be answering questions, some of your questions, for about 15 minutes or so. So you can type in your questions on whatever interface you are logged in. With that, let me welcome Dr. Seth Shostak to tell us about the SETI program and how scientists are looking for aliens. Seth, it's over to you.
Okay, I'm told I should wait 10 seconds for everybody to switch.
I think you can go, Seth.
Can I go? Okay. Well, I just want to tell 500 people tuning in. That's probably more people than I've met in my entire life. So that's a very large audience, and I feel a little bit nervous about that. But I'm going to tell you something about SETI, but also some new ideas about how we might be looking for life. And in order to do that, I've got to, okay. Let me just try this out here. Okay, can you see that? You know, I mean, you can't talk back to me, but if somebody could shout no or yes, then I'll proceed.
Yes, we can see you. We can see the slide. Seth.
Okay, all right. This is Bob here. He's your random ISO standard alien. And by the way, this little sculpture here was sent to me by a manufacturer that made these things. I think they thought that I would be able to sell them via my talks and stuff like that. So he sits on my desk. He's very quiet, and I don't have to feed him. Now, how are we looking for the aliens? To begin with, you know, we think they're out there because there's just so much real estate, right? One of the big triumphs in astronomy in the past, well, 25 years has been the discovery of planets around other stars. You know, when I was a kid, which was, you know, just before the Boer Wars, when I was a kid, people didn't know whether there were planets out there or not. But now we know that almost every star has planets. So in the Milky Way galaxy, there are like a trillion, that's a million planets. And, maybe most of them are sterile, but it's hard to believe that they're all sterile. So we think that there's something out there. And this is the way we've been looking in the past for alien intelligence. This is the Allen Telescope Array. It's, as you can see, in sort of desert country. It isn't really desert, but it's pretty dry. About 500 kilometers north of San Francisco. This is still California. It's probably all burned down now, but anyhow, that's the antenna system we use. It has 42 antennas. They're about 6 meters in diameter. We point these things in the directions of nearby star systems, figuring, well, they probably have planets and maybe they have aliens. So we're trying to pick up signals. That's how we have traditionally looked for the aliens, right? We can't go there. I think you mostly know that. Our fastest rockets, right? India has fast rockets and they go maybe 10 kilometers, 12 kilometers a second, which is pretty good if you're going to Pune, although, I mean, it's unclear why you'd want to do that. But if you want to go to the moon, that's okay. A couple of days you're at the moon. If you want to go to Mars, a couple of months you're at Mars. But if you want to go to the next other star, that takes you 75,000 years. And that's a long time to be sitting in a middle seat eating pretzels. So we're not going there, but if we can pick up a signal, that proves that somebody's out there. Where do we point these things? Well, we know about more than 4,000 planets around other stars. That's a big industry now, finding planets around other stars. And this is just a plot. This is a diagram that is almost, well, it's a year old now, but things haven't changed that much. You can see some of the planets here that are considered kind of like the Earth. They're about the same size as the Earth. We don't know much more about them than that. We don't know whether they have atmospheres or oceans or anything like that. But anyhow, these are the kind of places we look for. It all sounds very reasonable and very conventional. But we've not heard anything, despite the fact that the first SETI experiment was back in 1960, right? I was just, in middle age back in 1960. That's a long time ago, all right? And yet, even though it's been 60 years since Frank Drake's original experiment, we still don't know if there are any aliens out there because, why do we pick up signals all the time? They're not from aliens. They're from, satellites or radar or stuff like that. So, how do we explain that? Well, I mean, there are various possibilities. One possibility is kind of radical, but is that there simply aren't any aliens to find, that you are the smartest things in the universe, right? Or at least Homo sapiens is. Now, I know many of you would like to think that, but that's because your parents have been telling you ever since you were a kid, you were the smartest thing in the universe. But it might not be true. The universe is old. It's 3 times older than the Earth. So there's been plenty of time for intelligence to spring up on some other worlds. It could be that they're all, keeping a low profile. Maybe they're hiding because, after all, if you broadcast into space with a strong transmitter, you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe somebody will, send some intergalactic warships to your planet and, blow it up or something else. I mean, that sounds like a movie, and I think it only applies to movies, but still, it might be a good idea just to not make too much noise. The usual explanation for why SETI hasn't found ET is simply that we haven't looked enough. All right, so we got to look more. Now, people occasionally ask, what's the biggest challenge in SETI? And the answer to that is money. I know money doesn't interest young people very much, but money is the problem because SETI is not funded by the government. This is not American taxpayers' money. It's all by private donations, and that's a problem. And the last possibility is that, well, maybe the experiments simply just aren't good enough. They're not sensitive enough. Now, this is a stupid little plot here. I just plotted the size of big antennas, radio telescopes, as a function of time. And you can see, they're getting bigger by, I don't know, maybe 2 orders of magnitude per decade or whatever. It's not that fast. Anyhow, they are getting bigger, but not very quickly, right? It's expensive to build these big antennas. So if the problem is sensitivity, we may not find ET for quite a long time. Okay, so let me just go a little farther than that and throw some numbers at you that you can use at your next cocktail party, if indeed you ever go to cocktail parties. I would, but nobody invites me. This is a number that gives the typical sensitivity of SETI searches. So that's a very low power level, 10 to the minus 24 watts per square meter per hertz. So it's all very sensitive, but still, if the aliens are 200 light years away, their transmitter has to be at least this powerful, 10 to the 13, 10 to the 15 watts. Now, if you add up all the energy use of Homo sapiens, right? All the automobiles, all the light bulbs, all the tut-tuts, all the, all the laptops, add it all together, planes, trains, buses, everything, trucks, it comes to about 10 to the 13, 10 to the 14 watts. In other words, we won't hear them unless they have a truly mammoth transmitter. This is true of all SETI experiments. They're all about this, within 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, they're all about the same. And I should point out that getting something right to 1 or 2 orders of magnitude is considered very good in astronomy. So here's a big radar. This is in some ways the most powerful transmitter on Earth. This is down in Puerto Rico, and this is the Arecibo antenna, and it has a big transmitter up here. Okay, and I think it's 2 megawatts, so 2 million watts. So when they turn that thing on, this big antenna aims it up at the sky, and it's a really strong signal. It can cook birds if you're interested in cooking birds. There's an even bigger antenna, very much like this, kind of modeled after this, in China now. It's called the FAST antenna, but that's an acronym. In any case, what we're saying is, if we want to hear the aliens with the kind of equipment we have now, the aliens have to have a really, really powerful transmitter for us to hear them, right? And that might be too expensive, even for the aliens. I mean, we don't know what the aliens have and how much energy costs them, and even what sources of energy they're using. We don't know any of that. But still, 10 to the 13, 10 to the 14 watts, is a lot. And if they put a message on the signal, it's not just a kind of a flute tone in space. If it's more than that, if it has, music or talk radio or whatever, then it costs them even more because it takes more bandwidth. So there's a problem with this experiment in that we ask a lot of the aliens. Now, there's a way around this, and that is maybe the aliens have a really big array of transmitting antennas, and they're just beaming the signal to us, not to all of space. They're just focusing in on us. Hey, this is like, your laser pointer, right? Your laser pointer, I don't know what it is, maybe 20 or 30 milliwatts. It's very low power, but all that energy is in a very narrow beam. So if you aim one of these things at the student sitting next to you, you could probably blind them, even with 20 or 30 milliwatts. So maybe the aliens are doing the same thing. I mean, maybe they have, giant arrays of antennas and they're focusing on Earth. And in that case, we have enough sensitivity to pick them up. The trouble with this idea is that I don't think the aliens know about us yet, right? This little sort of 3D plot here just shows the nearest stars to the sun, the nearest maybe 3 dozen of them, okay? And, you can see there I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 of them, right? But those are the only star systems where I think the aliens could know something about us and be sending us a signal. Why? Because the aliens couldn't have picked up, the people of the Victorian times, the Raj, for example, they couldn't have picked them up because they weren't making any noise. They weren't broadcasting anything. It's very hard to see highways or buildings or any of that stuff if you're 20 light years away. That's really hard. So I think you're safe in assuming that unless the aliens by chance happen to be very close, unless there's some aliens that are within 30 or 40 light years, there hasn't been enough time for our signals like television or FM radio or radar to get to them, and for them to decide, oh, let's get in touch with those guys and send a signal back that we can pick up. Now, this is, I think, an important point that you might want to tell your next door neighbor when he claims that he's been abducted by aliens, because even though that might improve his social life, the facts are that being abducted requires them to have a reason to come here. And I don't think any aliens know that Homo sapiens exists yet. So it just doesn't seem reasonable that they're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time focusing a beam on Earth because they know of us, because they don't know of us. Now, what they will know is this. These are just some spectral plots of the atmospheres of 3 planets you know all about. Here's Mars down here. And Mars, it has some water vapor, very little, and some carbon dioxide, basically, in its atmosphere, not much else. Venus, carbon dioxide. Now, I have to tell you that there's a story that I can't speak more about coming out on Monday. So I don't even know what day it is in India. You're like 12 hours different. But on Monday, you will see a big science story coming out about something else in the atmosphere of Venus that's very intriguing. But basically, Venus, the aliens will know that there's carbon dioxide, CO2, in the atmosphere of Venus, but they won't know much more about Venus. The Earth, however, has oxygen and water vapor. And if they look at that oxygen, they say, oh, oxygen. They must have photosynthesis. There must be plants on Earth. And so maybe they would send a signal our way, because if we have plants, maybe we also have humans who can build radio receivers. Maybe that's an incentive, but I don't think it's much of an incentive, because if there are lots of worlds with life, then we're just on a long list at the back of a book somewhere. If that's not true, if life is very, very rare, then, statistically, the aliens are very, very far away, the nearest ones. And, they're not going to spend the time to send a signal that might take 500 or 1,000 years to get through it. So I don't think there's, very good reason to assume that the aliens are going to deliberately target the Earth with a signal. That would be great. It would make a job of finding them much easier, but it doesn't seem all that probable to me. Of course, if you ask my colleagues, they'll say, well, don't listen to him. But nonetheless, that's my reasoning. So if that's the case, if we can't really count on being able to pick up a signal from the aliens, maybe we should go to plan B and look for something else. And the something else is look for artifacts, something the aliens have built. Now, I know this looks like, I don't know, downtown Bangalore or something, but this is just obviously an artist's idea. But keep in mind that the universe is 3 times as old as the Earth, right? The universe is, how long has it been since the Big Bang? I remember the Big Bang. It was like 13.5 billion years ago. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So the universe is 3 times as old. So there's been plenty of time for very advanced societies to build big stuff. And maybe that's the kind of thing we could find. Because if you can build, big stuff, maybe we can see it. Now, this solves a lot of problems that SETI has. For one, and this is a fairly severe problem. You see a radio antenna down here, listening to the sky. Okay, that's fine. But we only point in one direction at one frequency for a few minutes. So you have to hope that the signal is getting to you during those few minutes. Otherwise, you just totally miss out. You say, well, Bob, no aliens in that direction. So this requires that they be, sending us signals all the time, or that you're just extremely lucky. Well, looking for artifacts doesn't have that problem. The artifacts just sit there. So you can look anytime, right? The second problem it solves is the fact that some people, not me, but some people think that broadcasting into space is a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? Because you don't know what's out there, and that's true, you don't. And maybe your signal gets picked up by some, aggressive society that decides they're just going to blow up your planet to keep you from competing with them, or whatever other reason they have in mind. This is this is Stephen Hawking here, and he made a point of this, saying that, you probably shouldn't broadcast into space. So, if you look for artifacts, you don't have that problem because the artifacts are just always there. You're not broadcasting, they're just always there. This is a bit like saying, Seth, I think you ought to go find the pharaohs of Egypt. Well, you're not going to find any pharaohs. I mean, the pharaohs are gone. But the artifacts are not gone. Here's some artifacts just outside of Cairo in Egypt. And these things have been sitting around for, 4,000 or 5,000 years, and they probably will be there for a while longer. So, it's actually maybe not easy to find the pharaohs, but it's easy to find proof of the pharaohs, evidence of the pharaohs by looking for the artifacts. Okay, so that's the analogy. Now, let me give you some examples of the kinds of artifacts, you might consider looking for, because people say, well, okay, but the aliens are not going to build pyramids that we can see. So what are you going to look for? Well, here's some examples. This was actually one of my thesis advisors. That's why I have this photo of him. This is Martin Schmidt. And he, in 1967, he actually found the first quasar. He didn't find it, but he identified it. He said, you know what that is? That's a quasar. He gave it the name, I think, quasar. Now, for doing this, he was actually on the cover of Time magazine. When I was a student, I was very impressed by the fact that my thesis advisor was on the cover of Time magazine. For a while, it was claimed that these quasars could be alien societies broadcasting signals to us. And that's because some Russian astronomers, really, it was the Soviet Union back then, some Soviet astronomers said these quasars were varying. They weren't a steady radio noise going into space. The noise was changing, and that's because the aliens were trying to tell us something. The American astronomers said, no, it's not changing. The Russians have just got it wrong again. And as it turned out, the Russians were right. It was changing, but all quasars change in a random sort of way. And it's not due to alien transmissions. It's just due to nature. But I point this out only to say that, doggone it, when you see something unusual in the sky, you really should consider the possibility that it's maybe the alien work. Here's another example, pulsars, 1967. The pulsars were actually found by the British at a radio observatory near Cambridge. And this is just a plot from those days when Jocelyn Bell, the young woman who was actually doing the work, found that there was something in the sky at this position that was repeating on a regular basis. It was like a clock, She called it a bit of scruff. Okay, so 1967. And actually, nobody knew what this was. And because it was so regular, for a while, people said, oh, well, it's LGMs. LGM, little green men. Okay, that was kind of a joke at Cambridge, but it was a possibility that, in fact, these signals were being caused by a deliberate transmission by an alien society. Well, the LGMs became less interesting as an explanation, within a year, because they found two more of these pulsating radio sources in the sky. And it was hard to believe that the aliens were kind of organized all around the universe, or around a galaxy, really, to all put out pulses into the sky. And besides that, something that just pulses regularly, ticks regularly, like a clock, doesn't really convey any information, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you sit around at night and just listen to the clock. I mean, you can do that, but you're not going to learn anything from it because there's no information in that kind of a waveform. But once again, in the mid-1960s, it was thought maybe we had found the aliens. Well, we hadn't, but we'd found something. This is more recent. This is just a couple of years ago. This is a light curve. All this does is show how bright a particular star is. And it's called Tabby Star because she found it, but this is its real name. It's just that that's hard to pronounce. And most stars don't vary in brightness. I mean, you can go out and look at the sun, tomorrow, and then look at it the day after, and you won't see a whole lot of difference in the brightness. I don't recommend that you do this, but I mean, you could do it. And if you actually measured the brightness of the sun with some sort of instrument, you would find that it doesn't change in brightness by more than, a few hundredths of a percent. When there are big sunspots passing across the surface, it's a little darker, and then it's a little brighter, a little darker, but it's very, very steady. But this star wasn't like that. This star, kind of dipped a little bit in brightness, and then it went down by 22%, and then it dipped again. This is not due to a planet getting in front of this star, because this dip is much, much bigger than any possible planet. There's something funny going on here. And it was the suggestion of a fellow at Penn State University, Jason Wright. He said, well, maybe what's there is a giant alien megastructure, a big construction in space that occasionally blocks some of the light. Now, this is known as a Dyson Sphere. Here's a Dyson Sphere. If you want more energy, and who doesn't want more energy, particularly as you get older? I mean, Freeman Dyson, the famous physicist, said, well, this is what a really advanced society would do. They would take apart some worthless planet, maybe Neptune or something, that's not doing very much good for you. And they would just really reconstruct it as a big sphere, or doesn't have to be a continuous sphere, but the same idea, and just put solar cells on the inside, collect all that energy from the sun, beam it back to your home planet on a microwave beam or some way. And then you have all the energy you could possibly use, no pollution, right? No climate change, no forest fires in California, this sort of thing. And you might be able to find this. If the aliens had built any of these things, you could find them, because the outside can't be perfectly cold. That's just thermodynamics. The outside has some temperature that might be the same temperature as, the guy sitting next to you, right? So you could find that with an infrared telescope. And people have looked, and they find some interesting things, but nobody is able to say yet they've actually found a Dyson Sphere. And beside that, it turned out that Tabby Star, the one that kept dimming, well, there's another explanation for it based on additional observations that suggests there's just some dust around that star, and then occasionally a blob of dust will block some of the light from the star. And a lot of stars have dust. There's a lot of dust in the world, or in the universe, really. I mean, it's going to be a big cleanup job. There's a lot of dust. So it doesn't look like Tabby Stars aliens either. But at least it was an idea, and you should follow that idea. Yeah, one more idea here. Oumuamua. I don't know if anybody can pronounce that. I can't. But that's Hawaiian. And this is a rock that flew into our solar system 3 years ago. This is not an actual photograph, by the way. This is just some artist's idea of what Oumuamua might look like. And it's very long. It's like a cigar, really. And we know that it's longer than it is, across, that one dimension is much larger than the other. We only know that because of the way the light bouncing off it changes. But an astronomer at Harvard University, a very bright guy, suggested that, well, maybe this wasn't really just a rock from somebody else's solar system, because its orbit tells you it's really here from somebody else's solar system. This is not just another asteroid from our solar system, it's from somebody else's. And he said, look, it's very unlikely that just a random rock kicked out of somebody else's solar system is going to make it all the way to our solar system and almost hit the sun. To be that accurately aimed and be a chance event didn't seem to him very likely. So he thought if you really made a photograph of this thing, unlike this artist drawing, you would find that it's, it's artificially constructed and there are little windows along it, and you might look through the windows and see little green guys looking back at you. All right, well, it turns out that within 2 years, a Russian amateur astronomer found another such rock from another solar system, 2I Borisov, and that's the guy's name. This is the best photo we have of that, but it's clearly an asteroid. So probably Oumuamua is an asteroid too. Disappointing if you were expecting rendezvous with Rama, the this story by Arthur C. Clarke, where the aliens, hollow out an asteroid and fly off to some place with better food than where they live. But in any case, it doesn't seem that these things are alien artifacts either. But still, you should always consider it. Here's another interesting target. I don't know how many of you people have been to this. This is these are the nearest stars to us, right? Aside from the sun, of course. Proxima Centauri, Alpha Centauri. They're about 4 light years away, which, as I say, would only take you 75,000 years in a fast rocket to reach. So maybe we should look there for something, or look here. This is a photo of the central parts of our galaxy. Actually, it's not, this is all stuff in the way, mostly in this photo, but near the center, that's the center of the Milky Way galaxy. It's about 28,000 light years away. So, that's going to take you a while to get to that too. But the big advantage there is that there's a giant black hole in the center of our galaxy. As there are in almost every galaxy, actually, giant black holes. And if you're really an advanced alien culture, maybe you figure, I'm going to go where the action is, right? The action is not in the countryside. I mean, I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying that, but the action is in the city, downtown, right? So that's downtown for the Milky Way galaxy. And maybe some advanced societies know how to get themselves into that place and use that big black hole to provide energy for them. And maybe they're having a better lifestyle than, I'm having. So that's possible. And we ought to continually look at the center of the galaxy, because there may be things there that are very interesting from the standpoint of very advanced societies. Here's another scheme. I know you're all falling asleep, but just think of me. I mean, I didn't get much sleep last night. And that is this. It's well known that, the inner planets, which is to say Mercury and Venus, occasionally get between the Earth and the sun, and they transit the sun. This is actually a photograph of I think this is Venus, actually, and these are various photos made as Venus transited the Earth. I don't know how many of you saw this happen. It wasn't so many years ago that this happened, maybe 15 years ago or whatever. But it's not that the aliens could actually make photos like this, right? We're too far away from their point of view. But what they could measure, what they could do, if they're really, really good at building telescopes, is they would notice that the Earth that the sun got dimmer when this happened by, maybe a part in 10,000 or something like that. Okay, even less. But they could measure that. We can measure things like that. And they would notice that in the case of this, Venus, it takes, 287 days or whatever it is to go around the sun. They would notice every 287 days this happens again. The sun gets a little dimmer. So they would realize, oh, wow, that's a planet, right? And so they might arrange, if they're trying to get in touch, they might send us a signal. Here are the aliens. And they send a signal that is timed to arrive just as the Earth is passing, the Earth or maybe even Venus, but is passing in front of the sun. In other words, this is a perfect clock that they will know about and we know about, and it tells us where to look and when, that we look away from the sun and see if there are any aliens trying to time their transmissions to get to us just at the right time. Okay, this is a little idea that we're actually going to try and follow up on with the Allen Telescope Array. Having said all that, putting everybody to sleep, let me make sure you don't wake up by telling you something more. And that is, I occasionally get asked by, usually television crews and stuff like that, but what will the aliens be like, right? And of course, we don't know. We haven't seen them. And you might think, oh, well, they're going to look like us, right? These guys look like you, right? I hope you have more hair than these guys, but yeah. They look like humans. I mean, if one of these guys moved in next door, you'd talk about them for a while, but eventually you would invite them over for dinner because, they have heads and 2 eyes and noses and mouths and all that stuff. They fundamentally look like us. And that's what Hollywood always does. It tries to make them look like us, because if the aliens look like a bicycle or something, it wouldn't be a very interesting movie because you wouldn't know how to relate to them. But this is what we assume. We always assume that the aliens are some sort of intelligent species hanging out, just waiting for us to hear their signal. But here's an important thing. This particular plot is due to a fellow by the name of Hans Moravich, and he's a roboticist at the University, Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Anyhow, it doesn't matter where he is. But what he did was he plotted up how much compute power you could buy for $1,000. Now this plot's a little old, but you can see that the amount of compute power you could buy for $1,000, how good is your laptop, has gone up, and it's gone up exponentially. Now, the last plot here, the last point in the plot is 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you could buy a computer for $1,000 that had the compute power of a lizard. Maybe not so interesting. But the point is that today, which is 2020, for $1,000, you can buy a computer that has almost the compute power of a human brain, right? Now, that's important because it seems that when you look at the timescales, this is Marconi over here. I think that's Marconi there. He invented the telegraph, Marconi, the first practical radio. I was thinking of a different guy. The first practical radio, about 1900. Within a half century, we had already invented computers. And yeah, they were a lot bigger than your laptop, but they worked pretty much the same way in terms of the architecture, right? And that only was 50 years from radio to computers. And if you talk to people who work in artificial intelligence, there are a lot of them that live near me here in the Silicon Valley, they will tell you that by 2050, we can build a machine that is as smart as a human. And then the next generation of that machine, 2 years later, will be smarter than a human. And within 10 years, you have one computer that's smarter than all the people in India put together. All right. Well, that's probably the most important thing that's going to happen in the 21st century. But, you could argue with them and say that's not going to happen, but it is going to happen. The only thing that's uncertain is how long it's going to take. And this has implications for what ET would look like, right? Because if you figure that any society clever enough to get in touch with us has already done that they're not going to be biological guys. They're not going to be guys like these, right? I mean, they're kind of appealing, but maybe they can sing well. But these aren't the guys you could expect. The advanced intelligence in the universe may be artificial intelligence. It's a machine. And that changes everything for SETI because, how do you find them if all you have are big antennas like this one down in Australia, right? The machines might not be broadcasting anything, and they don't have to live on planets. Why does a machine have to live on a planet? All right, you put a rocket engine on its back and just go off somewhere else, right? So how do you find them? In order to find them, you have to ask, well, what would machine intelligence want? And here's some ideas. Maybe they'd be doing things like, I don't know, playing solitaire forever. I think after a long time, even solitaire might get boring for a machine, particularly if you can play, 10 million games per second or whatever they can do. So, that's probably not what they're doing. Maybe they just build really big stuff. Here's a society built by the machines. I mean, in total imagination. Or maybe they do what are called ancestor simulations. This is a fellow who's at Oxford University in the UK, Nick Bostrom. I think he's actually in the philosophy department, but got a lot of logarithms in this plot. What he says is, look, computers are getting faster. They're already pretty good at video games. And in another 30 years, you can have a computer that can do the ultimate video game where everything is very, very realistic. And he suggests that there's a 20% chance, think about this, a 20% chance that you are not real, that you're just living in a simulation. You are just a digital simulation by people who live 50 years from now. I don't know how that makes you feel. I don't know if that's going to change your behavior today, but it's an idea. Maybe that's what the aliens are doing. They're just running simulations all the time. They're addicted to video games. Maybe. Or one last thought here. This is, of course, one of the Hubble deep field photos. These are all galaxies, by the way, that you're looking at there. Maybe they realize that the real existential problem for them and for everything else is that the universe is destined for doom. Oh, sure, it's pretty interesting now because the stars are all shining and, there's a possibility of biology and that sort of stuff. There's plenty of energy around. But all those stars are going to go away. They're all going to burn out, and they'll all burn out in 10 to the 12, 10 to the 13 years. The last star will pop out in 10 to the 13 years. That's it. So all this radiative energy, starlight, that goes away. And now it becomes very hard to do much because the easy sources of energy have gone away. There are still some other sources of energy, but eventually, the last black hole evaporates. That's it. In about 10 to the 100th years, that's a Google, 10 to the 100 years, it's going to be very hard to just even roast a chicken because there's not much energy around. And of course, there won't be any chickens either. Okay. Now the aliens, the really advanced ones, may realize that this is a problem because things are really going away. And you might say, well, they don't worry about it any more than you're worried about the fact that, as we discussed just before this session, India is moving, northward into Asia at the rate of a couple of centimeters a year, and eventually that's going to be a problem. But you don't worry about it because it's so far into the future. Maybe, but if you're a thinking machine and you can live forever, maybe you do think about that. So maybe the artifact we ought to look for is some attempts to fix this problem. Now, I don't know how that works, and nobody does, but this is one suggestion by a guy at a research lab in Illinois. He says, look, one thing the aliens could do, they could just try and round up all the stars they could to give them for energy for a long time, at least, push the problem far into the future. They could gain, many billions of years by doing this. If any aliens are doing this, then, we'll find the aliens by just finding places in the sky where there are a lot of stars sort of collected together. That isn't nature. That's obviously somebody engineered that. Okay, this is a pretty far out idea, but this is the kind of thing that, maybe we should be paying attention to. Not that it's very easy to do this experiment, but you might just by accident trip across something like this. This is an idea of Bob Zubrin's. The aliens will make an artificial black hole because you can get a lot of energy out of a black hole. And with an artificial black hole, you could maybe power a really advanced society. Again, that sounds like science fiction, but keep in mind that the timescales allow this because of the fact that there are societies out there that have had billions of years a head start on us. Well, finally, just to wrap this up, here's the Allen Telescope Array at night. Keep in mind that, Homo sapiens is just a sort of a little blip in history. And we should, in fact, try and broaden our thinking to not just look for the kind of radio signals that we make, but to look for any way in which the universe has been changed. So, okay, that's it for the slides because I know you've had enough of those. And we have some time for questions if anybody is still awake.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for such a wonderful talk on aliens and how scientists are looking for aliens. I really hope all our audience have enjoyed the session and gained a lot from this. Well, I can see a lot of questions from our audience in Q&A box, both in Microsoft Teams and YouTube. Since there is a time limitation for all of us, I'll try to select some questions and we'll ask to Dr. Seth. So here's our first question from Mr. Arjun Suraj. Sir, I have heard many news about UFO sightings by Pentagon. What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, I get asked about UFOs all the time, actually. I don't do research on UFOs, mainly because I think that the UFOs are not alien spacecraft. I think that if I thought they were, in fact, if I thought there was even a 1% chance that they were really alien spacecraft, I would spend all my time looking at that evidence. I get phone calls and emails every day from people who claim to have seen something that they think are alien spacecraft, and they send me their photos and videos, and it's usually 2 or 3 pixels, a little dot moving across the sky. Well, I mean, that could be aliens. It could be an aircraft. It could be balloons. There are 100 things it could be. And so, if you want to assume they're aliens, you can. But the scientists in general don't believe that.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Samik Datta. Do you think the Great Filter exists, which prevents alien civilization from progressing beyond a certain level? And if it does exist, what are the chances that we have already passed the filter, or the filter is actually ahead of us?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. The idea of the Great Filter actually originated with an economist in Virginia by the name of Robin Hanson. And what he said, I think, being an economist, he said, well, maybe there's a great filter, like there's a great filter for, tech companies to produce social media platforms, right? It's hard to get into the business, and it's now dominated by the winners, and it's hard to compete. But what he's saying is that, look, the fact that we haven't heard any signals from space is because clearly there must be something that keeps biology, little microbes, from eventually turning into something intelligent like humans. Otherwise, we would have heard something. So there must be a great filter that's filtering them out. Well, I think that the reason we haven't heard any signals is because A, we haven't looked very hard. B, we don't have enough sensitivity. And C, people might have, or aliens might have very little incentive to broadcast in our direction, as I said a little earlier. So, Robin Hanson's argument was that, well, either there's a great filter that keeps any aliens from becoming as smart as we are, or, and that's why we don't hear anything, or the big filter is about to hit us. It's really not an or. It's that we haven't hit the big filter, but that means that we will soon, because all of them have, right? We'll follow them, and we're going to wipe ourselves out, wipe ourselves off the face of the earth. I don't find that a very uplifting kind of idea, but to me, it's an interesting idea, but it's like the Fermi paradox. It's an interesting idea, but I don't think it tells you anything very serious about who might be out there.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Atna. Sir, what is the operational cost of SETI program? Why is the government not interested in supporting the SETI program?
Well, those are 2 interesting questions. The second one is harder than the first. The first one, what does it cost? For the SETI Institute to run the telescopes and pay the scientists a small amount of money, right? it costs on the order of $1 million a year. Now, unfortunately, I don't know the exchange rate with rupees or whatever, but about $1 million a year. So that's what it costs. The second question, why doesn't the government fund this? Because after all, the United States government certainly spends a lot of money looking for life, right? How much does it cost to send a rover like, the Perseverance rover, which is on its way to Mars now? What does that cost? It costs hundreds of millions of dollars. That kind of money would support SETI for a century, right? And yet they don't do it. And the reason is largely politics. It's also because, there are people who control the money who don't think that this is a very serious enterprise. And by the way, it isn't just government officials who feel that way. I lived in Europe for 13 years, and in Europe, they don't do any SETI. They actually don't. But they have the equipment, and they have the, the expertise, and they have the money, and they still don't do it. I think you could say the same of India. There was only one person who was doing SETI in India. He was a professor in Pune, and he did some SETI experiments because there are big radio telescopes in India, but in general, they don't do it. And the reason is cultural. It's cultural because, as I say, the Europeans in particular, they could do this and they do not because they don't consider it a serious enterprise. So you can do with that bit of information whatever you want, but I mean, it has nothing to do with the ability to do it. It's the willingness to spend the money.
Thank you, sir. Next question. What is the current status of our understanding of how life originated on Earth? Was life on Earth seeded from space?
Well, that's kind of nice to think that we're all immigrants, that we all came from some other solar system. But if that's the case, then it had to happen, 4 billion years ago when the first life began to show up on Earth. And of course, it was microbial, protozoans and so forth. And it's not impossible that that life originated in somebody else's solar system, or maybe on a different planet like Mars, and some rock slams into the planet and kicks off all this debris. And the debris spends a couple of 100,000 years traveling around and by chance happens to hit the Earth, and suddenly we have life. That could be. There's no evidence for that. I mean, in a way, you could say there's no evidence against it either. But there is this. You could send a rock with microbes in it from Earth to Mars or Mars to Earth, and the microbes would probably survive. But if you send them from, some solar system that's 10 or 100 light years away, then the microbes, if they're anything like microbes we have here, they don't survive because there's no liquid water and there's all this very hard radiation, high-speed particles, really, subatomic particles, zipping through space all the time that would destroy any of the molecules of that life. So it's hard. There's the other problem that, you have to have a lot of these rocks if any of them is ever going to hit the Earth, for example. Right? The Earth is a very small target when you're talking about being 10 light years or 100 light years away. So, it's an interesting idea, and a lot of science fiction films like to talk about it, but it's not clear to me that it's very likely to be true. Hard to prove, though.
Thank you, sir. Next question from Jijin K. Raj. Sir, what's your opinion about Arecibo Signals and crop circles?
What was the second? Arecibo Signals and?
Crop circles.
Oh, crop circles. Well, the Arecibo signal was a transmission. That was, what, 1977, or either 74 or 77, anyhow, whatever. So that's like 40 years ago. And it was a demonstration. The people at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, I showed a photo of it, were celebrating the improvement of the technology of that telescope. And as part of the improvement, they broadcast a signal into space that was designed by Frank Drake, who was the director of the observatory, and the employees there. And it was just a bitmap that they sent into space. It took 3 minutes to send it, and and the bitmap shows, very simple drawings of what your average human looks like, and something about DNA and something about the telescope. But they broadcast it in the direction of what's called a globular cluster, a big, assembly of stars, several 100,000 stars, which is 25,000 light years away. So it will take 25,000 years for that signal to get there. And if there are any aliens that pick it up and want to respond, it'll take another 25,000 years for the response to get here. So that's a wait time of 50,000 years. And my personal interest in that project is somewhat minimized by the fact I have to wait 50,000 years. Now, the other thing was crop circles. Does it make you wonder why the aliens only want to talk to the British, right? And in particular, the residents of Hampshire and Wiltshire. Crop circles are known to be made by artists in the UK. They love to, make them, and it really annoys the farmers. They love to make them and make photos of them, and they become, it's like being a YouTube star in a way to make these crop circles. But if you were an alien, would you really spend the money to go to a different planet, a planet that might be very far away, namely Earth, and then carve some graffiti in the wheat crops down there? I mean, it doesn't convey very much information because these are symmetrical designs. There's very little information in a symmetrical design. And it's a very expensive project to do essentially nothing. And then the farmers then mow them all away the next day anyhow. So it doesn't sound like a good way to communicate to me.
Thank you, sir. So our final question in Q&A session. This is from Thomas Lan. If it is so unlikely to find ET using radio, then do you think we should keep on doing it? If yes, why? Or are the resources better invested in other ways of detection?
Well, that's a tough question. And unfortunately, I'm giving this talk to you and not to my colleagues because they're somewhat invested in the radio approach. And so have I been, to be honest about it. I don't think we should stop doing that because at least it would provide a very unambiguous clue that there's somebody there. Because if you pick up a signal and it's a narrow band signal, it's one spot, one frequency on the radio dial, then it's a transmitter. So that's pretty unambiguous. I do think, however, we ought to be looking for artifacts too, but there's no way to know what to look for. I mean, there are these ideas. I've thrown out some of these ideas, but it's probably the best thing you can do for artifacts is to make sure that everybody who does astronomy, everybody who has big telescopes and looks at the night sky, whether they're studying galaxies or the formation of stars or whatever they're doing, should also pay attention to the fact that if they find something that's very unusual, then it should be followed up. You should try and figure out what it is. I don't think that's a big problem. Astronomers in general always follow up on something that's unusual because, after all, if you find something that's unusual, you might get tenure at your local university. So people do that.
Thank you so much, sir, for all your answers. Now I'm inviting Ms. Shraddha, Managing Editor, Shasthra Snehi, to deliver a vote of thanks.
So, hi, everyone. And I would say that the session was really informative and very interesting. The different aspects of extraterrestrial search was explained in a very interesting manner. We're very grateful to Dr. Seth Shostak, the speaker of today's webinar, for spending his valuable time with us in spite of having such a busy schedule. Thank you, sir, for being with us. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Anand Narayan, Associate Professor, Department of Earth and Space Science, IIST Trivandrum, the moderator of today's webinar, for your kind support and time for this event. Above all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all the participants and the entire team of Shasthra Snehi for your participation and efforts to make the session a productive and a successful one. We will be soon meeting you in our next session, and thanks once again for joining with us today. Thank you, and have a nice day ahead. And thanks once again for joining with us today. Thank you, and have a nice day ahead.